Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Reviews where today we have ourselves a track from an act named Later Than 8 titled Razor's Edge. And if we switch over to here we have ourselves the video on YouTube. Now it should be noted just before we get into this, my understanding is that Later Than 8 is a solo act. I've reviewed previous tracks from Later Than 8 and so they've done features and collabs, but apparently this track was written, performed and co-mixed by composer Justice, and the final mix was engineered and mastered by Denesser, who also mixed and mastered the previous track Let Me On. So just a little bit of sort of like information before we get into it. And this track is live if you want to check it out on it's digital stream services afterwards. But anyways, we're going to listen through the track today from start till finish. We're going to hear what we think. Let's go. It's kind of unnerving, isn't it? With the noise elements. Things fluctuating around the stereo field.
In the darkness I find I'm lost, can't find a way. I stumble and I fall, but I'm here to say
Interesting groove. I'm trying to find the first beat.
I need a prayer to guide me through the night, to help me learn to stand and find my light.
It's an interesting environment we're creating here. The vocals are kind of psychedelic, trippy with the vocal modulation on them. It's very intense, but I kind of dig the aesthetic. It's a little bit different. The synth, the guitars, the bass drums. It's an interesting, and as I mentioned earlier, an interesting environment we've created here. It makes me wonder how we're going to sort of continue to develop it over time.
I don't have all the answers, that's my truth. I'm standing at a crossroads searching for my you. I need your strength, need your love, need your grace to navigate me through this journey. Find my rightful place and hopefully I won't fall at all.
I mean, it's a heavy bass response. A little bit of vocal fry there, I suppose. Trappish kind of inclinations with the triplet hi-hats. Iteration on the lyrical theme. And an iteration upon that theme on the hook line. Interesting track. Interesting track. I will talk about more in the conclusion, but I've got to actually a moment to process it. And welcome to the conclusion of my review of this track from an act named Later Than 8, titled Razor's Edge. Now, what do I think this track is about? I think it's about someone who is just in a really difficult, sort of perilous situation with someone else involved. Potentially their actions and behavior of the future is dependent or sort of affected by that other person, and ultimately it just seems like a really sort of terrible situation. Describing how we're in the unknown and everything like that. Who the fuck I am, etc. Like, it seems like we've almost lost ourselves in that sort of that craze, that kind of like a surrealist kind of situation, that environment. And it's a very heavy subject matter to discuss, but I think we do it in a way lyrically where it is it's mature and thoughtful, and I think that there will be people who recognize this and will be able to sort of relate to it. I think at the same time, with a track like this, the vocals need to sort of present that desperation in a way that is not overplayed while still being authentic. And I think we have that here with the vocals, the way it's sung. Heavily vocal modulated. There's like lots of misdirection, sort of warping and kind of twisting and gnarling of those lines, especially in the hook sections there, and amongst the sort of the writhing of all the other components in the backing. It's not the most comfortable listen I've had from a purely kind of listening perspective, but from more sort of like a creative merit, I can appreciate why we're doing it. It's meant to sort of be the distorted thoughts, I think, inside our own heads. That kind of like stupor, that kind of that desperation, that angst, that stress, what it can do to your own sort of fragmented, sort of frazzled mind. I think that's kind of what's being communicated here, and I think in a sense they managed to get that aesthetic covered really neatly. It's definitely a different sort of sound to a lot of the singing and rapping and all that kind of stuff I hear from musicians now, and growling that I hear from musicians nowadays. It's not like it's the first time I've heard stuff this kind of intense with the Vocaloid synthesis and stuff like that, but it's nonetheless, I think it's effective if we consider it in the scope of the entire project rather than purely by itself. It sounds cool, don't get me wrong, it's just I think you need certain levels of context in order to make this work, and I think we had that here. I think we, with a 3-minute 47 track like this, with various verse sections, like an interlude and choruses, and like an extended chorus near the end, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong, I might be misremembering, but the song was fleshed out well. There was no filler. There was an interesting sort of melding again of bass, guitar, though it sounded quite distant. That was an interesting decision mix-wise, but I think it allowed the synth to take precedence with synths, and those were the main sort of instruments that I could hear. There was some interesting sort of glitchy, kind of almost Foley-ish parts in the start, with the lead line kind of swirling around in the headphones before we kind of came into the full sort of bore kind of content. But, it's an interesting track. Like, talk about a few of the components I appreciated. The drums with their 8th and 16th grooves there, they weren't overplayed. They were permeable. They reflected what was, I think, needed in order to create a sense of interest whilst also not overwhelming the rest of the mix. We hit the notes in the correct place with the right sort of speed and tempo, and it was just a tight performance there. I think that the guitar, from what I could hear of it, was relatively minimalist as well, with the vocals being the focal point, and it served more as a sort of a texture within the arrangement rather than a dedicated alternate lead. The basses that we had there were kind of prominent in the hook, as well as they weren't always there though. I think we did remove the bass and the sub elements sometimes just to allow things to float a little bit, but mostly when the bass was there, it was meant to sort of like kind of weigh you down a little bit, I suppose, tonally. I think that makes sense here. The last thing we need is to have a state of, how do I describe it? The last thing we need is for us to have a state of it being too sort of light and fluffy sounding when we're discussing really serious elements. Sometimes the bass needs to sort of pull the listener down in order to sort of like couple that, in order for it to kind of be believable. And the synths that we had as well, they were kind of mesmerizing in their sort of influence upon this track there. It really became, I don't know, like almost like some sort of dark wave-ish elements there. It was a little bit sort of twisted sounding, and the overall composition did sort of fluctuate and oscillate with variations in the intended sort of perceived loudness there, in a way I think which was again meant to represent the difficulties we have sort of processing the situation both lyrically and instrumentally. But they were great textures nonetheless. I appreciated the fact we experimented with different sounds and brought the Y-runs together in a sense to create the situation we needed. The theme was also quite intense, but I think that was simply because it was trying to sort of like mirror the stuff we were discussing lyrically, the darkness of the minor parts there, the influence of the mids and lows, without too many sort of like bright moments. Like maybe there were occasional kind of higher sort of vocal bits or sheens in that upper range there, but it was mostly kind of smothered in the mids and lows. Not that was a bad thing. It was just such a big sounding sort of like song in those hook sections because of how things were pushed in the post that it really did kind of sound like it was kind of swallowing you whole. It was interesting to have the vocals as more of a sort of a synth lead than anything else in that chorus part to sort of articulate further upon what other elements within the backing had already organized. And ultimately, it just kind of signaled to me with the minor triads, the slower kind of tempo there with the subtle ghost note 16ths and stuff. And just, again, that ominous sort of dooming kind of like doom spiraling bass. It's like almost like we're not sure if we're going to get out alive, if that makes sense. So I think if that's the intended effect, then it works really well. And, you know, finally, the studio recording, mixing, mastering. I think that it was done really elegantly. I think there was range between various sections. We deliberately pushed a bit harder in certain elements to make it louder to kind of, wouldn't usually be a fan of that, but I think if it's more of an aesthetic of like an uncertainty, sort of like a discord or dissonance, it makes it within the lyric and the performance, if that's meant to sort of be there as well with the production, then that makes sense and I'm happy with that. The vocals came through sort of reasonably cleanly with the effects change added to them. The guitar, synth, bass, and drums and all that kind of leveled each other nicely. And the stereo field and frequency spectrum were no resonant frequencies aside from the ones I noticed earlier with like the bass resonance and the line and stuff. It was nice and loud without pumping, so the bus compression, well, it was nice and no, actually no, I say that. It did pump, but it was like not in a way where it was egregious. And that's effectively my review of this track from an act named Razor's Edge, titled Later Than 8. It's a song where I don't feel much better after listening to it, but I can appreciate that that's maybe not the intention of the track. It's more sort of a communication of their position, or sort of maybe just trying to make some. It's always difficult with these kind of songs. I don't want to sort of go on too much of a tangent. When I say that I don't feel better after listening to a song, it's simply because I kind of emote with it. I don't think that every song should be nice, though. Don't get me wrong. Like, I don't think every song is meant to make you happy. It's just a reflection of what the musician is going through. So I appreciate their opening themselves up and showing that sort of vulnerability. But anyways, thank you for watching my review of this track from Later Than 8, titled Razor's Edge, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go show us some love via the various social medias and the YouTube page, and stay cool and stay safe. And please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they have more than ever thought of crazy stuff going on in the world. And I will catch you in the next review. Spiderhands out.